Hey everybody, what is going on? HexLex here, got another Master Duel video for you. It's the end of the season, or rather the beginning of a new one, which means it's time for another one of our tier lists. So, as always, I've picked out 30 of the top decks. It says 31 down here, I think it's selected the folder as well, but 30 of the top decks with the highest both win rate and popularity according to Untapped, which of course sources hundreds of thousands of games in order to generate that data. So that's what I tend to lean to when deciding what to include here on the tier list. Again, 30 of the most played decks according to those figures. Now, if you're not seeing a deck here, if you think that a deck should be on here, like it should be in the Rogue tier. I'm not saying that every single deck that's not on here is like below Rogue, that it's casual. But again, there are only so many decks we can cover, right? If I was going to cover every single deck that I thought was Rogue, we'd have, honestly, probably 100 decks here. Because there is a lot that I think is Rogue. Rogue also, to kind of define that, is a deck that I think, while not as good as a tiered deck, is still competitive enough when optimally built and played to sneak in a Master 1 finish or a tournament top, right? I usually like to kind of differentiate Rogue between upper, mid, and lower Rogue, depending on how easy it is to do that, right? So, and again, I think there are a ton of Rogue decks out there in Master Duel. There's a lot that you can actually do very well with in this game. So, again, if you don't see a deck that you like on the tier list, don't worry, I probably do think it's Rogue, because again, there are quite a few. As always, feel free to let me know in the comments what you think. Even if you disagree, I definitely look forward to seeing those kinds of comments, just as long as you're not rude about it. Rudeness is not fun, but discourse I think is. So again, if you want to let me know what you think, feel free to do so. But anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right on into it. So, right at the top here, we actually have one of the more prominent decks of the meta, as represented by Garunix, is going to be Fire King Snake Eye. Pure Snake Eye will be on this list a little bit later. I'm going to evaluate those two decks separately, because I do think they are very different decks. But for Fire King Snake Eye, I don't think it's a surprise to literally anyone at all to say that the deck is still tier 1. Honestly, moving into this video, I'm already noticing that this tier list is probably going to look almost exactly the same as the last one. We do have a couple of new decks over here that, of course, have come out since the last video did, but as far as the meta itself goes, the last selection pack did not really shake it up that much, and I would be surprised if the next one did too, just because we are going into the World Championship format. I would expect the next major release to probably be in October's pack, right? So I think that with all likelihood, this tier list will not only be applicable now, but probably for the whole, until we get that next major release at some point in October, right? But anyway, so yeah, Fire King Snake Eye is still definitely a tier 1 deck. I think it's probably still the best deck of the format, but I think it's a lot closer than it might seem. I might get into that more when we discuss some other tier 1 decks, but yeah, no, Fire King Snake Eye definitely up there. Again, to literally nobody's surprise. All right, next up we have Makonko. Makonko, I think I'm going to continue to put in tier 3. This is definitely a deck that you still see around quite a bit. I think I vastly underestimated Makonko when it first came out. I remember thinking that, oh, it's like Numeron, but a little bit better. But that was very, short-sighted, right? And only focusing on the going second OTK strategy of Makonko. Most Makonko builds actually don't even want to go second, funnily enough. If you look at the data on Untapped, you'll see that it has a much higher going first win rate than a going second one. So Makonko is not only good at that kind of OTK, but also just a very solid warrior combo deck in its own right. Very, very good. All right, we have Kashtira. Oh, Kashtira, where do I want to put you? Have I even played against Kashtira once this season? I don't know if I have. Kashtira is one of those decks that I literally see more. I see it complained about online more often than I actually see it in Master Duel, because I really don't think it's that great of a deck. I think a lot of people agree with me. I think the general consensus is that, yeah, Kashtira isn't good, it's just annoying, and, I think there's definitely a difference between, overpowered and annoying. When it comes to Kashtira, not only is there consistency in the tank, but also you can just imperm a Rise Heart and then be completely fine. Just play through a Unicorn and a Fenrir, which again are annoying. The extra deck and card banish, especially I know a lot of people don't like the extra deck banish, but most decks can play through it pretty easily. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of tier 3. I really am at the point where I'm about to start putting Cashier in Rogue, because it really feels that way. But for the time being, I'm gonna leave it at the very bottom of tier 3. I think that's a fine enough spot for it. All right, Pearly. You know, Pearly is actually kind of interesting because, I want to put it in tier 2, and I think that is where it's going to end up being. But not only on Untapped, but if you actually look at official in-game win rate statistics, Pearly actually has the highest win rate, which is kind of crazy to me because it's not a very popular deck. It's not a very talked about deck. It's just kind of one of those sort of mainstays of the format where you can generally expect to run into Pearly. But for a deck that's as unassuming as this to, again, have the highest win rate is pretty staggering. I almost wonder if it's because a lot of decks I've noticed in the extra deck nowadays, just from building decks myself, don't really have as much room to include like Underworld Goddess. So I wonder if that has something to do with it, right? Like when Snake Eye was, pure Snake Eye that is, was running around before SP came out, you know, we were at a point in time where Underworld Goddess was seeing a lot of play. Because a lot of people are like, oh, Snake Eye, they always make Appaloosa. But even before SP came out, like, it was optimal to make Underworld Goddess. It was always more optimal to make the Underworld Goddess. Not always, but the vast majority of the time it was, right? Like, if you shotgunned your IP into an Appo, you were just going to get triple tacked or impermed or just wrecked. But the Goddess, of course, is a form of removal as well as negation, and again, serves as a very, very convenient out to the X-Pearly Noir. But yeah, I mean, I do find myself, you know, playing a lot of games against Pearly where they have the X-Pearly Noir out, and I think to myself, well, this doesn't seem that bad, it's just one monster. But then it's like, oh, well, yeah, but I don't really have a way to out it, and it's spinning away all my stuff, so I think Pearly might actually end up being the top of tier 2 for me this season. We'll see how it plays out here. Runic, I think, you know, if you look at the breakdown for Runic on Untapped, I believe it's mostly counting Bestial Runic, because Runic Stun isn't really that much of a thing anymore. So I'm going to count this as Bestial Runic, which is, I think, the most popular variant. I think it's a pretty firmly rogue deck. I think all the variants of Runic are rogue. As I said in my banlist video, I really do think that, especially in a world where 80% plus of decks are on SP Little Knight, like, they should have another fountain, right? Like, again, I know Runic's not popular, but, you know, as always, I prefer to look at the game through a more objective lens of how good is this deck in the format as opposed to how much do I like this deck. And even though I don't like playing Runic, I think it's at a point where it needs another fountain to stay competitively relevant. Well, not necessarily competitively relevant, but like be able to keep up with the rest of the tiered decks, you know, and maintain its rogue status for a time to come. Anyway, Paleozoic I've been typically putting at the bottom of Rogue for most of these tier lists. That's probably where it's going to end up being here as well. I don't think it's a bad deck. Again, every single deck on here I think does have a very good shot. And not only does have a good shot, I think every single deck on here has at some point had a tournament top in a Master Duel community tournament, and has definitely hit tier, or I mean Master 1, right? But of these decks, I do think Paleo tends to be the weakest, but of course still a fine deck. I'd actually love to try playing Paleo at some point. The main reason I haven't is just it takes so many weird URs that I don't own, like Trap Tantalizing Tune and Time Sharing Morganite, and I think I only own one transaction rollback. Oh no, I don't own any, so anyway. Paleo is still a cool deck. Sword Soul here, gotta throw that in Rogue as well. I think, to be fair, and somebody pointed this out in the comments of, if it wasn't the last one, it was a recent tier list video. A lot of the low win rate of Sword Soul might be due to the fact that so many newer players are on the deck. Although, to kind of counter that point, whenever I'm looking at tier list data, I always filter to only show me data from Diamond and Master ranks. And even when you do that, where new players presumably are not going to be, Sword Soul still has a really, really hard time maintaining an above 50% win rate. Again, as I've said many times in the past, it's just a classic. The most, in this meta, the most obvious example of power creep, where Sword Soul did not, you know, sustain any major ban list hits. We even still have Protos legal, but it is still just not performing very well, unfortunately. So I say unfortunately because I think it's a cool deck. I mean, again, I say not performing very well. That's relative to how it used to be, you know, a year, or maybe not a year, but a year and a half ago, where it was like a tier 1 threat. All right, continuing on with more rogue decks here, we got Sky Striker. I think Sky Striker is pretty comparable to Sword Soul and Runic Bestial to a degree, so I'll put it between the two here. That new Sky Striker support, I don't know, it's interesting. I've seen Sky Striker around, but I don't really see it on like the Cyanos, right, in the main deck as often. I guess it was the Camellia, the Link 2. I think that was the biggest boost to the Sky Striker deck from that wave of support. I know they also play the other Link 2 some of the time, the Double Engage, I think that's what it's called, but yeah, I don't really think it's like necessary or vital to the game plan of that deck. Okay, next up we have Tier Limits. I'm gonna put them in tier 2, but I'm actually gonna put them below Pearly. I think I usually put Tier Limits above Pearly, but again, the data doesn't lie. Pearly does have an extraordinary win rate, both according, again, to Untapped and official in-game win and usage rate data. That said, I still think that Tier Limit is definitely one of the best decks of the format. I'd probably say it's the top 5 deck of the current format. Just because it's Tier Limit. Despite all the limitations, it still does what it does. I've seen, as time goes on, I see more and more people be like, free Merly, free Merly. No, we can't do that. I think Merly actually did end up being the perfect ban for Tier Limit as opposed to Kikalos in, is it just a TCG, I think? But, yeah, because banning Merly stops the deck from abusing Sprind. Not even really Elf. A lot of people say, oh, if you just ban Elf, then Merly is fine. It's like, no, Sprind is the one that sends it. Like, you're not even getting it right. But just also the fact that they're like having a third fuser increases the consistency of Tier Limit so much. Like, think about Tier Limit. Think about playing against a current Tier Limit deck, right? Think about how often they hit what they need to mill and how often they're able to make their plays because their deck is currently that consistent. Even one copy of an additional fuser, not even like a second Havness, right? Which would still be a huge buff to that deck, but adding another third fuser would skyrocket the deck's consistency and in turn power level. I think if Merly even just came back to 1, we would definitely see Tier Limit become a tier 1 deck again. Maybe even the best deck of the format, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. So, I think Tier Limit's perfectly fine in this current iteration. I think it's at a perfect power level where it is very, very strong. Again, I think a top 5 deck of Master Duel, but certainly not as overpowered as it once was. All right, Centurion is what we got up next here. I gotta say, I vastly underestimated Centurion when it came out. I thought it was going to be like a mid-rogue deck at best. I was like, how could this be any different or better than like Horus Naturia? But I will say, the layered interactions of Centurion are definitely noteworthy. Noteworthy different tactic from Naturia Horus, which is also turboing out a bunch of level 12s, but is being very face up about it and just putting them all on the field right away, right? Again, the interactions with Centurion are more layered. Centurion also able to be blended with a lot of different synchro strategies, including, of course, Naturia Horus, but also Bestial stuff naturally, as well as the Stardust Dragon package. So I'm going to put Centurion in tier 3, and I actually think it's kind of close to being tier 2, like a lot closer than I think a lot of people would think. I'm going to put it towards, I think, upper tier 3. And Centurion is also getting, like, it has multiple waves of support that haven't come out in Master Duel yet. So this is a deck that is already very, very solid, that is only going to get better with time. And the Calamity ban, a lot of people be like, oh, but Calamity's ban, and that definitely has not affected how good this deck is, I think. I would definitely keep an eye on Centurion moving forward. All right, we got a couple of new decks here from the latest selection pack. The first one we're going to talk about is Ice Barrier, which I've been having a ton of fun playing, both pure and certain variants. I will say that Ice Barrier surprised me, much like a lot of these decks that I try out from the selection pack where I'm like, oh, this will probably be like a lower, maybe mid-rogue deck. I mean, to be fair, I do think Ice Barrier is a mid-rogue deck, and maybe even on the lower side, I do kind of want to put it below Paleo, but I'll leave it above Paleo for the time being. I was kind of floored by how solid the Ice Barrier game plan was, right? I didn't think at a glance that ending on like Lancia plus Dragite was going to be good enough, but that actually does get you there a lot of the time. Definitely don't underestimate the power of the Ice Barrier Floodgate monsters, especially General Raiho. But Yeah, I do think it's going to be one of those decks that's going to fall off pretty quickly. Like, probably even within the next season, we'll stop seeing Ice Barrier on the, untapped tier list because it won't be played that much. But that doesn't mean that it's any less of a deck, Just because a deck isn't played doesn't mean it's bad. A lot of people, whether subconsciously or consciously, kind of end up making that correlation. But Ice Barrier, very, very good deck. Voiceless Voice. So this is probably going to be the big new one, right? Well, it is the big new one. It's from the latest selection pack, and of the cards and the decks in the latest selection pack, it definitely has had the most meta impact. We did see a good amount of popularity when it first came out, but unlike Yubel, which is also not only very popular when it first came out, but still extremely popular deck, Voiceless Voice is actually already kind of starting to slip off in terms of popularity, and it never did hit that initial same stride that Yubel did. And I think the answer is obvious, right? Yubel, if you look at it, is actually a really cheap deck UR-wise, right? Like, you need the 3 Nightmare Throne. You can get away with 2 Phantom of Yubel, but I think you really should be on 3. And that's like pretty much it for archetype exclusive, URs, right? There is still like the Unchained stuff like Sharvara and Yama that you would need if you didn't already, build Unchained beforehand. But Yubel Loving Defender is the other UR. You don't actually need it unless you're on the Super Poly specifically, which is optional. And again, you could even play 2 Phantom if you really wanted to, but I really do think you should be playing 3. But even then, only 6 UR is very, very cheap. Unlike Voiceless, which is like, oh gosh, it's like about as expensive as a hero deck if you don't own like a set of Diviners and the Odd Eyes Pendulum Graph and Sauravises, right? Which, to be fair, the Diviners and Sauravises are like relatively generic URs compared to the rest of the deck. So anyway, I'm yapping. What else is new? Where am I going to put Voiceless Voice? I'm going to put it in tier 3. I'll put it above Centurion. Like, I personally would like to put Centurion over Voiceless Voice, but I really don't think I can do that if I'm actually looking at the deck's power level, not just how much I like it. I think even more so than Centurion, Voiceless is actually extremely close to just being the bottom of tier 2. It has also had a fair amount of tournament tops as well. I might actually just put it at the bottom of tier 2. It's so close. It's so close. You could really make an argument either way. Let me leave it up here for the time being, and we'll just see how the rest of this tier list ends up playing out here. Rescue Ace. I've been putting Rescue Ace in tier 1. And I think if I were only looking at tournament tops, I would continue to do that. But I think I actually gotta put Rescue Ace at the top of tier 2. I know I said I was gonna put Pearly there, but I wasn't even really thinking about Rescue Ace when I said that. Yeah, because that's the thing, right? This blows my mind to say this, but I'm thinking about the last season, right? The last month playing. And I don't know if I played against Rescue Ace at all. And again, this is in Diamond and Master rank, right? Maybe once or twice, but it's been very spotty here or there. The deck is just not really that popular anymore. But of course, if you're looking at a power level, from power level perspective, I do think it is still one of the strongest decks in Master Duel right now. And we do see that in tournament tops. Rescue Ace has not slowed down in terms of how many and how many tournaments it does top and how well it does within those tournaments, right? But that's the thing about ranked ladder and why it's so different than any other form of Yu-Gi-Oh meta, really, because it is going to be more dictated by what people want to play as opposed to what they think is optimal, right? In a tournament, you're always going to bring what you think will perform best because naturally you want to win, right? But, in the ranked ladder, it's funny that people call ranked ladder sweaty because relative to tournament play, ranked ladder is extremely casual. Like, you can definitely just goof around with decks. I mean, to a certain degree and still rank up, right? And I think the lack of Rescue Ace on ladder kind of comes from a desire of a lack of wanting to goof around with it. I mean, it seems to me like it's one of those decks that doesn't have like nearly as many dedicated fans as certain other archetypes. Like Tier Limit's actually a great example of that. Like, although I think Rescue Ace is like the stronger deck right now, Tier Limit is so much more popular because so many more people just love playing Tier Limit. And I mean, I kind of don't blame them. Like, I don't think Rescue Ace is a boring deck, but at the same time, how many times can you really Turbulence set 4 and be like, woo? But anyway, I do still think it's a very, very strong deck. Again, part of me does want to put it in Tier 1. If I was only thinking about tournaments, I would put it in Tier 1, but I'm going to put it at the top of Tier 2 and just leave it there for now. Okay, Monadium. Yeah, I'm going to put Monadium in Tier 3. I'm kind of debating if I want to put it above or below Centurion, because the thing is, like, when Monadium goes first and it really goes off, like, it's definitely a scarier end board than Centurion, but I also think that Centurion has more flexibility in terms of, like, if it gets disrupted, right? I mean, I don't know. That's the thing about Monadium. Playing into Disruption with Monadium is a little bit dicier than some other meta decks, right? You don't always have a clear line through each individual piece of Disruption, and I think that's why sometimes going second can be a little rougher for Monadium than other decks. Granted, they do have Vicious Astrolabe to help them when going second, but at the same time, you know, although that is good at clearing away the board, if you're in a situation where you get disrupted and have to rely on Astrolabe, you're probably not going to be winning the game that turn, right? So I think it's really close. I actually think Centurion and Monadium are probably just about equal. I'm going to leave Centurion above Monadium, and I think the main reason I'm doing that is because although I actually do kind of think Monadium might be slightly more powerful right now, I think that Centurion has a lot more future potential, right? Again, it's got multiple waves of support coming out, which are pretty relevant for the deck, so I'm going to leave it like this. I'll just leave it like this. Exosister, I'm going to continue putting Exosister in Rogue. I think it's pretty comparable to Sky Striker in terms of its power level. Like Sky Striker, it's a very solid control deck. And while you might think that, like, oh, this is a really good meta to be, you know, on a graveyard hate strategy, I don't know, it's like, it's not quite as good as it might seem. I think it kind of comes down to the fact that while, yes, Exo is a good graveyard hate strategy, there's still only so much power level wise that it can do. But, I mean, I still think it's a very solid Rogue deck. I mean, I have it towards the top of Rogue here, so it's a good deck in its own right. Definitely not trying to diss it. Live Twin Sprite. Okay, actually, we're going to talk about Live Twin and then also Pure Sprite. So for a while, you know, I considered Live Twin Sprite to be the best Sprite variant because of its ability to make one-card combo lines much more easily than other Sprite variants, right? Sprite is inherently an archetype of extenders, right? Every single one of them needs that level 2 monster to be on the field. Ironically, the only one-card starter of the deck is called Sprite Starter, right? So, Sprite doesn't inherently have those one-card lines, which are becoming more and more important for Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why Live Twin in the past was the best variant. I'm going to put Live Twin Sprite. I'll put it in Rogue, actually, right between Exo and Sky Striker. However, Pure Sprite, I'm actually going to put in Tier 3, and I'm even going to put it above Makonko and Kashtira, because if you look at untapped stats, Sprite in Diamond and Master Rank is currently the 5th highest win rate deck. Now, win rate alone, of course, doesn't dictate how good a deck is, because the thing is about, you know, win rate, the fewer people are on a deck, the lower the popularity is, the more likely those people are to be experts on the deck, and thus it will kind of quote-unquote artificially inflate the win rate. Not really artificially, because the deck is actually winning that much. It's just only being piloted by people who are particularly skilled at it, as opposed to a deck like Yubel, which has a very, very high popularity rating, meaning that even people who aren't as good on it are also playing it, and still has a very impressive win rate, right? So, but the thing about Pure Sprite that I think makes it better than Twin Sprite is that now there are actually a good amount of one-card starters for the Sprite deck. Of course, Darkbacking Beast was always a one-card starter, but now thanks to Nightmare Throne, it's very, very searchable. So that makes the Pure Sprite strategy a lot more viable. Also, the Nightmare Throne lets you tech the Yubel package, adding some more insulation to your combo lines, making the deck that much better. And I have also noticed that, and maybe it's just because I've been doing it too, but a lot of more people are on Hero Kid. The popularity of Hero Kid is definitely rising. And as much as I do love the Nimble engine, I do actually think that for Pure Sprite, the Hero Kid engine is very, very good, much better. So there are certain variants where the Nimble engine is still better, like Ice Barrier, but yeah, I think it's a good time to be a Sprite player. Coming from the most vocal Sprite enjoyer, I think, out there. So, good stuff. All right. Stun, 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 stun. I mean, I will say that Stun's win rate lately has been at least a bit better than it's been in the past, which, I don't know, you can probably tell by my tone I'm not the most thrilled about. I don't suspect most people are, but, I mean, I don't know, it is what it is. Stun will, in some way, shape, or form, always be a part of the meta. I know there's always that you know, a very, very vocal part of the audience that's like, and probably even a larger part of the audience too, that's like, just ban every floodgate, but it's like, I mean, you kind of can't do that. Like, even, I mean, you could do that in theory, but as I always say, there is a place for stun in the meta. If there are no stun or control decks or heavy back row decks, then every single deck is like 20 hand traps, 20 engine, which people have also often said they really don't like. And so there is something to be said for, like, I don't think stun keeps the meta quote unquote in check, whatever that means. I think that stun kind of keeps the meta honest in that it makes you have to prepare for a variety of strategies, right? As opposed to being like, all right, everyone's turbo comboing off because there's no control or stun decks, so I'll just jam hand traps and, you know, be good to go, right? The inclusion of stun and also, again, heavy control decks that are back row based do kind of keep you on your toes from a deck building perspective as well as a gameplay perspective. And I know people are going to be like, oh, but stun is boring. They just do nothing. How is that interesting? But again, we're not talking about the individual game against stun. We're trying to look beyond just ourselves and the individual and see how it affects the meta as a whole, right? So, but where does that put stun on the tier list? I think stun has pretty much always been, you know, at the best lower tier 3 strategy in terms of its power level. I'll put it in rogue, just about in the middle. I think it's pretty comparable to stuff like Sky Striker and Twin Sprite and Exo. I'm actually kind of surprised I have Exo so high on the rogue tier list, but I don't think there's an issue with that. Okay. Yubel. This is actually kind of something that I was actually talking about this earlier when I talked about Fire King Snake Eye, right? Trying to figure out, because it's definitely a tier 1 deck. There's no mistaking that these two are tier 1 decks, but like, which one is better? What is the best deck of the format? In the past, I've said that it's Fire King Snake Eye, just that Yubel was more popular because it was more new. Yubel has not dropped in popularity at all, though, since it came out. I suspect, again, maybe some of this has to do with how cheap of a deck it is. I also, to be fair, think that, you know, if people are gonna build a tier 1 deck from scratch right now, it's definitely smarter to build Yubel, which is getting more like future support in the form of Varudross and general Fiend support, as opposed to Fire King Snake Eye, which is on a lot of people's radar for potentially getting hit by the ban list in some major way at some point in the future. So at that point, it also makes sense why this is the more popular deck. I think I've come to the conclusion that these two decks are probably just about equal in terms of power level, which is why it's kind of hard to pin down which one is better than the other. And that comes from looking at tournament results, tournament top results. They tend to get about the same, Yubel and Fire King Snake Eye. I think that Yubel would only get slightly more because it's more popular, and also just from my own experience playing both with and against the decks. So, I'm going to leave it like this with Fire King Snake Eye above Yubel, because I do think that currently, in my opinion, it's slightly stronger. But if your tier list said this, I would not argue with you at all. I think that, again, for all intents and purposes, these are equal in terms of power level. I guess, to be fair, if I'm putting Centurion higher because it's getting some help in the future, then maybe Yubel should be higher for that reason as well. I just know somebody's going to be like, somebody's just going to skip to the end of the video, look at the tier list, and not have watched the content and be like, oh, you think that Snake Eye isn't the best deck of the format? What are you saying? I guess we'll see if we get that comment. Anyway, Super Heavy Samurai has seen a lot of actually popularity lately, although I notice it about as much as I notice it played about as much as an engine as it is its own deck. In fact, it's probably played a little bit more as an engine than its own deck. Certainly in like Synchron and like big Snake Eye pile decks, you often will see that Super Heavy Samurai package. I'm actually going to put it like upper in Rogue. I do think that it is a very solid strategy still. It's just not a very popular one. I think, you know, it's funny. Super Heavy Samurai is always the first thing I point to when people are like, consistency hits never do anything. And it's like, yeah, because Soul Piercer totally going to one totally did not kill Super Heavy Samurai in terms of how often it's played or anything, right? And this one is even just in terms of like popularity on ladder. You don't see this deck topping tournaments anymore either. Again, wonder of wonders, the consistency hit actually seemed to do something. Because you can do the full Super Heavy Samurai combo with only one Soul Piercer. You don't need multiple to combo. But yeah, having those extra copies did in fact end up making the difference there. Pendulum, I'm going to put in Rogue, but I'll put it towards the top because I do think it tends to be a stronger strategy than Sword Soul. Panda Magician, this is that, rather. But yeah, I mean, that Zark stuff was not just, you know, for show. It definitely did give a very nice boost to the Panda Magician strategy. Okay, next up we have Vanquish Soul. I'm gonna put Vanquish Soul in tier 3. I'll probably put it, I think it's pretty comparable to Makonko. I don't think it's quite as popular as Makonko, so I guess I'll put it a little bit lower, but in terms of power level, I think it's pretty much right here with Pure Sprite and Makonko. I actually kind of noted this in my Vanquish Soul video where, you know, for a while, Vanquish Soul was like the highest win rate deck. Again, you know, not the most popular, but the highest win rate deck. And I think a lot of the reason it kind of started to drop off is actually because of how not great Snow Devil is against the current meta. Like, one of their main forms of interaction is a trap card that destroys all monsters your opponent controls, which is cool, right? Except that Yubel and Fire King, the two best decks of the format, really actually want their stuff to be destroyed. So I think that kind of contributes to why Vanquish Soul is not as great in the current format. That's always something you need to take into account is unique factors like that, not just the deck's power level and popularity. Salamangreat continues to be a very well-performing rogue deck. I'm going to put it here in upper rogue. I keep meaning to go back to the deck, and I haven't done it yet, which is a shame because I think it's a lot of fun. And the new support is very great. I know it's like... A lot of people have said, you know, when I talk about banning Promethean Prince, it's like, what about Salamangreat? I do think that would be the greatest casualty. However, I'm very certain because I did it during the Fusion Link Festival. You can still end on extra Link Pyro Phoenix even without Promethean Princess, right? Because Promethean Princess was banned during that event. And I definitely remember still ending on some pretty solid Salamangreat boards. Now, granted, that was an event, a festival, so the meta wouldn't be quite the same, but at the same time, the meta doesn't also impact what you're able to do on turn 1, necessarily, as far as your end board, right? So, I don't know, I still think that we could ban Promethean Princess and Salad would notice it, but I think instead of being upper rogue, it'd probably be more like, you know, down here, which is, like, not ideal, certainly. I'm not saying that Salamangreat needs to get hit, but, I think in terms of reining in the fire meta and just Promethean Princess being just honestly, frankly, far too good as a card, it would be worth it. But that's just my opinion, and that's coming from somebody who likes Salad again. But that's just my own take. All right, Labyrinth. Oh, we're actually going to put another deck in tier 2. I'll put it above Voiceless Voice. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for Labyrinth. I actually almost put it in tier 3 because Lab is another one of those decks where I notice that over time the popularity tends to drop off more and more and more. But when I think about Lab's power level and its resource loop and its, you know, how the deck performs when its gameplay plan is going off, it's like, yeah, no, it's just a very solid deck, still very solid. So definitely going to keep it in tier 2 there. Hero is the Eternal Rogue bench warmer. I'll put it down here. Again, I think it's pretty comparable with like this level, the mid rogue. You know, we can finally establish this as a mid rogue, right? Exo, Twin Sprite, Sky Striker. I'll throw Hero in here as well. Unchained, I'll put, you know what, I'll put this on the top of Rogues. I think that is about the spot where Unchained goes. It's that deck that's like just there. It's like just enough to be not only meta relevant, but almost tiered. But I think from a power level perspective, it's just not quite there. And unfortunately, I think as more Fiend support goes on to come out, that's going to be more and more apparent that, like, you know, you could play Unchained Pure, or you could just pluck out the best cards from the archetype and throw them into other Fiend decks. And I think, again, that is where the fate of the Unchained archetype probably is going to end up lying. Mathmech, I'll put in tier 2. I'll put it, Yeah, I'll put it above Voiceless Voice as well, because although you don't see Mathmech's kind of an enigma, right? You don't see it played in tournaments that often, although when it is played, it does tend to do pretty well. But I still see it on ladder quite a bit. Actually, still play it myself on ladder quite a bit. And as far as the laddering deck goes, I think Mathmech is very, very good, because it's not bad going second at all. You have multiple ways to make an OTK, and you can pretty much always do it through one or two pieces of disruption. So I think this is, again, a rare circumstance where we're actually seeing a deck be better in a ranked ladder format than necessarily a tournament format. Well, I guess it's not necessarily rare, but yeah, I think Mathmech is still, again, it's lower on the tier 2 spectrum. It's kind of funny how, like, Circular never got hit at all, and, like, Mathmech is just kind of naturally getting power crept out of the format. Circular was very pushed when it first came out, but yeah, I think the rest of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has caught up to it. Okay, Pure Snake Eye. Okay, this is where I kind of struggle here. Alright, you know what, I think I am actually going to put Voiceless at the top of tier 3, and I'll keep putting Pure Snake Eye at the bottom of tier 2, because when I really stop and think about it, I'm like, is Pure Snake Eye... Okay, you know what, actually that is a good question to ask myself in regards to what tier I'm going to put this in. Is Pure Snake Eye in Master Duel right now better than Voiceless Voice? That's close. I think it is. I think it is very, very barely. Very barely. I think it's very, very close. But I think one thing that we can definitely say for sure is that Pure Snake Eye is definitely just not it compared to Fire King Snake Eye. And, you know, again, I think about, like... I think about, you know, the fact that Pure Snake Eye is like a tier 2, potentially falling into tier 3 deck, and that Pure Fire King, well, not popular enough to be represented here. I'd actually probably put in like upper to mid rogue. I still think it's a very, very solid deck. And I'm just like, what is the problem here? And that's why I really think it's got to be Promethean Princess. Like, it's funny how, God, when it comes to Block Dragon, people will constantly make the, no, it limits the design of rock monsters. You can't keep Block Dragon around for that reason. And yet, for some reason, with Promethean Princess, that one, it's like, no, fire decks need it. And I'm like, no, it's limiting the design of fire decks. It's keeping them down, because while a card as broken as Promethean Princess exists, fire decks can only be so good, right? And I don't like the idea of one card existing that limits the power of an entire attribute. But that's just, again, my whole 2 cents. So, okay, 2 more decks we'll just finish off real quick here. Branded Despia, I'll put it, you know what, I'll even put it above Lab. Yeah, it's definitely, of course it is a tier 2 deck, and I think this is a pretty good spot for it. Probably mid tier 2, again, above Lab and Mathmech, but not quite as good necessarily power level wise as stuff like Pearly Tier and Rescue Ace. And finally, Fluanderies. I think this one is actually going to be the top of Rogue for me. I'll put it above Unchained here, because it is one of those borderline decks where it's actually still seeing quite a bit of play. Oh, well, you know what has caused a recent resurgence for Fluanderies is actually a recent release, the Swallow's Cowrie. I almost forgot about that. Yeah, that card has definitely given a nice boost to the Fluanderies deck. Not enough, I think, to pull them necessarily out of, like, you know, upper Rogue, maybe the bottom of tier 3, but I do think it is definitely a good deck, a very good deck, and they did get a good bit of help there. So, okay, that's gonna do it for my tier list here. I'm looking it over, just kind of glancing it, and yeah, I think I'm pretty satisfied with where I end up putting everything. As I've said before, and I'll continue to say, I do think we're in a pretty diverse meta, and I don't mind the current power level of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm still having a ton of fun playing it, so I would go, and because I value diverse metas, I would go so far as to say I think the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty healthy. That's something I've been saying, but just want to throw that out there again. Especially if you look at tier 3, all these cool, weird decks that are actually very, very viable. It's good stuff. Anyway, I think that's going to go ahead and do it for this one. Thank you, as always, for watching, especially if you watched all the way to the end and didn't just skip to the end to see the tier list. Again, I'm sure I'm going to get a few comments of people who did just that, but that'll do it for this one. Let's just go ahead and move now to our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Just want to give you a huge thanks for watching all the way to the very end of the video. Believe it or not, that is actually one of the best ways that you can support the channel, is by watching the videos in their entirety. But there are many ways in which you can support the channel if you are so interested. The names that you're seeing on screen here, I gotta give an extra special thanks to, because these are people who have chosen to either become a member on YouTube, which if you're interested you can do as well via the join button next to the subscribe button down there, or have signed up over on Patreon and become members there. Link to that is going to be in the description below. Without the support that is being offered by, again, all the people that you're seeing on screen right here, I would not be able to take the time to dedicate to uploading daily YouTube videos. So thank you so very much. But there are also other ways you can support as well. Again, link to the description below. If you like my deck tracker that you'll see in a lot of my videos, the Untapped Companion, you can download that for free, and if you use my affiliate link down there, then that also goes a long way towards supporting the channel. That's, again, free. So is subscribing here on YouTube. That's also free and a huge way to support. You can also check out Twitch, once again linked in the description below. Following and subscribing over there will not only support as well, but also give you notifications of when I go live if you want to catch some of the live streams. But really, no matter how you choose to support, it all adds up and it all definitely means the world. So thank you, each and every one of you. For now, this is Hexlex. I'm going to be signing out. But more than that, I'm hoping that you have a fantastic day.